In the final, fleeting moments of peace, the Pacific Ocean lay like a vast cerulean dream, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. But as the year 1941 bled into its final month, a shadow began to stretch from the east, a long, sharp shadow cast by the emblem of the rising sun. It was the dawn of a new kind of war, a war that would be decided not on land, but upon the endless, unforgiving expanse of the sea. The Imperial Japanese Navy, a blade forged in secrecy and honed by decades of relentless training, was about to carve its name into history with fire and steel. The world awoke on December 7th to a symphony of destruction. At Pearl Harbor, the sky, once a tranquil canvas of Hawaiian morning, was torn asunder by the roar of engines and the thunder of explosions. It was more than an attack, it was a statement. The American Pacific Fleet, a proud symbol of power, was broken and burning, its great battleships lying wounded and submerged in the shallow waters of the harbor. The strike was executed with a terrifying precision, a perfectly choreographed dance of death that left the world breathless and the United States reeling in disbelief. This was not merely a battle, it was the brutal opening act of an empire's grand ambition. From that day forward, the Japanese war machine moved like a crimson tide, unstoppable and all-consuming. The fall of the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, and the impregnable fortress of Singapore followed in rapid, shocking succession. On the waves, the Imperial Navy seemed possessed of a mythic power. Two of Britain's mightiest warships, HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse, sent to halt the invasion of Malaya, were swatted from the sea by swarms of aircraft, their sinking a grim testament to the new reality of naval warfare. Every engagement seemed to end in another stunning Japanese victory. Their fleets moved with a ghostly grace, striking with overwhelming force before melting back into the vastness of the ocean, leaving only wreckage and despair in their wake. A myth was born, the myth of an invincible navy, guided by an ancient warrior code and an almost supernatural mastery of the sea. For the Allies, the Imperial Japanese Navy was no longer just an enemy. It was a specter haunting the waves, a seemingly unbeatable force that threatened to engulf the entire Pacific. In the vast, silent theater of the Pacific War, the night was a stage set for a drama of terror and steel. And under the cold, indifferent spotlights of the moon and stars, one weapon played the lead role, a phantom of the deep that turned American confidence into chilling dread. It was known to its creators as the Sanso Gyorai, the oxygen torpedo. To the Allied sailors who learned to fear its invisible approach, it earned a more mythic name, whispered in the dark watches of the night, the Long Lance. This was not merely a torpedo, it was a masterpiece of lethal artistry, an instrument of death perfected over 2 decades of obsessive secrecy. While American and British engineers were bound by the perceived limits of technology, designing torpedoes that ran on compressed air, Japanese designers had made a terrifying leap into the unknown. They had harnessed the very essence of fire itself, pure, volatile oxygen. This choice was a stroke of dark genius. Where a conventional torpedo would betray its path with a frothing, churning trail of bubbles, a white scar on the black ocean canvas, the Long Lance was a ghost. It ran almost completely wakeless, a silent assassin slipping through the depths, its only announcement a catastrophic eruption of fire and shattered steel against a target's hull. Its stealth was only the beginning of its legend. The oxygen fuel propelled it across distances that seemed to defy logic. An American Mark 15 torpedo had a range of just over 3 nautical miles. The Long Lance could hunger for its prey across 22. It was a spear thrown from an impossible distance, capable of striking a fleet that believed itself to be safely beyond the horizon of battle. And it struck with unimaginable force. Its warhead, packed with over 1,000 pounds of powerful Type 97 explosive, could break the spine of a cruiser, tear the heart from a destroyer, and send it plunging into the abyss before the echoes of the explosion had faded. All numbers spoken, its official designation was the Type 93. For the men who faced it, it was simply death incarnate. Imagine the scene. The deck of an American cruiser, the USS Helena, slicing through the Kula Gulf. It is a night shrouded in tropical blackness, the air thick with the scent of salt and the hum of engines. On the bridge, lookouts strain their eyes, their faces illuminated by the faint green glow of instrument panels. They are hunting, alert for the muzzle flash of an enemy gun. They are looking at the horizon. But the true enemy is not on the horizon. It is already among them, swimming silently below. Without a sound, without a wake to give it away, the first long lance strikes. A pillar of water and flame erupts amidships, lifting the 1,000-ton warship as if it were a toy. The deck plates buckle, screaming in protest. A second and third torpedo follow in merciless succession, tearing the vessel apart. For the men on board, there is no warning, no chance to fight back, only a sudden, violent transition from life to a watery grave, consumed by the unseen monster they never knew was there. This weapon became the centerpiece of the Imperial Navy's entire night-fighting philosophy. Japanese sailors trained for this deadly ballet with a fanatic's devotion. Night after night, in all weather, they drilled, memorizing the silhouettes of enemy ships, calculating firing solutions in their minds, and launching their precious torpedoes with a precision that bordered on clairvoyance. While Allied navies saw night as a time to avoid decisive action, a murky veil of confusion, the Japanese embraced it. The dark was their sanctuary, the long lance their Excalibur. Their cruisers and destroyers, organized into wolf packs, would prowl the slot between the Solomon Islands, becoming the terrifying specter known as the Tokyo Express, a nightly parade of death that the Americans seemed powerless to stop. The confidence of the Japanese sailor, already sky-high after Pearl Harbor, swelled into outright arrogance. They were the samurai of the seas, the undisputed masters of the night, and they laughed at the clumsy, technologically inferior Americans who blundered into their perfectly laid traps. The Pacific became their private hunting ground, and the long lance was the silent, unerring tool of their reign. It was a place that God, if he ever existed, seemed to have created in a fit of feverish rage and then forgotten. Guadalcanal. The name itself was a discordant sound, a guttural word for a primeval world of suffocating jungle, volcanic mountains shrouded in eternal mist, and swamps that bred malaria with venomous efficiency. It was a green hell, a sodden, steaming island of little consequence on the world's maps, until the summer of 1942, when the tides of war washed over its shores and transformed it into the very crucible of the Pacific conflict. For on this forgotten island, an airstrip was being carved from the wilderness, an unsinkable aircraft carrier from which Japan could sever the vital lifeline between America and Australia. And for that reason, this green hell had to be taken. On the 7th of August, the United States Marines stormed the beaches. They met little resistance, a deceptively quiet beginning to a campaign that would descend into unparalleled savagery. They quickly seized the nearly completed runway, renaming it Henderson Field, a dusty, pockmarked patch of earth that would become the most contested piece of real estate on the planet. The initial success felt intoxicating, a first, defiant blow against the myth of Japanese invincibility. But the Empire, stung and enraged, was preparing its reply, and its answer would come not from the jungles, but from the sea. Thus began a rhythm of relentless, grinding warfare that defined the campaign. By day, the skies belonged to America. The Cactus Air Force, a motley collection of pilots flying from the besieged Henderson Field, rose like angry hornets to meet Japanese bombers, their courage a fragile shield for the Marines clinging to their precarious perimeter below. But when the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in lurid shades of orange and purple, a palpable sense of dread would fall over the island. For the night belonged to the Imperial Japanese Navy. Almost every evening, as darkness provided its cloak of invisibility, the Tokyo Express would begin its run. This was the name the Americans gave to the ghostly flotillas of fast Japanese destroyers and cruisers that sped down the narrow strait between the islands, a channel that would soon earn a far more sinister name, the Slot. They were a vital artery, pumping fresh troops and supplies into the Japanese war effort on Guadalcanal, and a hammer relentlessly bombarding the exhausted Marines. The nightly shellings became a psychological torture, the whistle of incoming rounds a lullaby of death, shattering nerves and turning the jungle into a landscape of splintered trees and mangled earth. The U.S. Navy's mission was brutally simple and borderline suicidal. They had to stop the Express. They had to sail into the blackness of the Slot and fight the masters of the night on their own terms. Picture a young Marine, barely 19, huddled in a foxhole slick with mud and his own sweat. He hasn't slept properly in weeks. For him, the war is a visceral, close-quarters affair of sniper fire and sudden, terrifying, banzai charges from the jungle's edge. But tonight, the war is different. He looks out over the water and sees the horizon erupt in a silent, distant display of pyrotechnics. Tracers, like fiery red insects, stitch patterns across the black velvet sky. The colossal, brilliant flashes of naval guns illuminate the clouds from below, creating a flickering, hellish aurora. He can hear the dull, percussive thunder rolling across the water, a sound so deep it vibrates in his bones. He is watching Titans clash in the dark, watching ships, his Navy's ships, die for him. He doesn't know who is winning or who is losing. He only knows that out there, in that bloody water, men are being torn apart by steel, and his own survival depends on the outcome of this spectral, distant battle. He feels utterly, terrifyingly helpless, a mere spectator to a contest of gods and monsters. Night after night, the battles raged. The Battle of Savo Island, the Battle of Cape Esperance, the naval battle of Guadalcanal. The names blur into a litany of carnage. American commanders, blinded by the dark and haunted by the specter of the long lance, sent their ships into the meat grinder. They fought with savage bravery, but they were outthought, outmaneuvered, and outgunned in the nocturnal arena. Ships laden with American sailors sailed into the Slot, only to become blazing funeral pyres, their magazines detonating in volcanic explosions that lit up the night for miles. Both sides bled, pouring ships, planes, and men into the maelstrom. But the cost for the United States Navy was staggering, a catastrophic loss of steel and lives. The waters around Guadalcanal were becoming a graveyard, the seabed littered with the twisted skeletons of once proud warships. A new name was about to be written on the naval charts, a name paid for in blood and iron. There are places on this earth that become so saturated with human tragedy, their very names become epitaphs. So it was with the stretch of water that separates Guadalcanal from the Florida and Savo Islands. Geographers knew it as Savo Sound, a placid, unassuming name for a tropical channel. But by the autumn of 1942, the men who fought and died there had given it a new, more fitting name, a name spoken in hushed, somber tones. They called it Iron Bottom Sound. It was not a name born of poetry, but of a grim and terrible reality. For the bottom of that sound was no longer mud and coral. It was a tangled forest of twisted steel, a watery sepulcher for dozens of warships and thousands of men. It was the graveyard of American hopes. The litany of loss was as relentless as the nightly tides. It began with the catastrophic Battle of Savo Island, a slaughter that took place in less than 40 minutes of bewildering, one-sided violence. In that single horrific night, the Imperial Navy, under Admiral Gunichi Mikawa, slipped past a picket line of American destroyers and fell upon the unsuspecting Allied screening force like a pack of wolves. The result was a massacre. The heavy cruisers USS Astoria, USS Quincy, and USS Vincennes, along with their Australian counterpart HMAS Canberra, were sent to the bottom, their guns barely having a chance to fire. They vanished beneath the waves in a maelstrom of long-lance torpedo hits and shell fire, taking over 1,000 sailors with them. It was the worst defeat at sea in the history of the United States Navy, a brutal lesson taught in the dark, and it was only the beginning. Night after night, the ghastly arithmetic of war continued. The cruisers, USS Juneau and USS Atlanta, the destroyers, Cushing, Laffey, Barton, Monson, and Walk. The names became a funereal roll call, a testament to a foe who seemed to own the darkness. The Americans were trapped in a ghastly, recurring nightmare. They would sortie into the slot with grim determination, their commanders peering into primitive radar screens that were more a source of confusion than clarity. They would form their battle lines according to doctrines written for daylight gun duels, only to have those neat lines shattered by torpedoes they never saw coming. Their own torpedoes, the Mark 15, were a national disgrace, often running too deep, failing to detonate, or even, in some infamous cases, circling back to threaten the ship that fired them. They were fighting a modern naval war with one hand tied behind their back, blinded and armed with defective weapons. Imagine you are a sailor, just a boy from Ohio or Texas, plunged suddenly into the warm, oily water of the Sound. Your ship, the cruiser USS Northampton, is gone. One moment it was a fortress of steel beneath your feet. The next, it was torn in half by two long lances, its death agony a scream of tortured metal. Now you are just a head bobbing in the black water, the taste of fuel oil coating your tongue. The night is alive with horror. Around you, men are screaming, some for their mothers, some in pain, some simply screaming at the indifferent stars. The water is dotted with flickering fires from patches of burning oil, casting a spectral glow on the faces of the living and the dead. In the distance, you see the silhouette of another American cruiser, the USS New Orleans, its bow completely sheared off, a ghastly monument to the enemy's merciless efficiency. And then you hear it, the thrum of engines fading into the distance. It is the sound of the victorious Tokyo Express, leaving its handiwork behind. In that moment, floating in the wreckage of your world, you feel a despair so profound it is heavier than the water pulling you down. You are not just defeated, you are humiliated. Hope is not just lost, it has been brutally extinguished. By November, Iron Bottom Sound had devoured nearly 50 Allied and Japanese ships. It was a shared cemetery, but the weight of the losses felt heavier on the American side. Their strategy was in ruins. They could not reliably stop the Express. They could not protect the Marines on the island from nightly bombardment. The pride of the U.S. Navy had drowned in those bloody waters. Senior officers were sacked, strategies were questioned, and a deep sense of gloom settled over the Pacific Command. The Japanese were winning. Their mastery of the night, powered by the phantom long lance and a warrior's spirit, seemed absolute. The name said it all: Iron Bottom Sound. It was where American ships went to die, and where the hope of victory was being buried, one steel hull at a time. In the wake of disaster, in the quiet, desperate moments between battles, a new kind of faith was being born. It was not a faith in gods or in admirals, for both seemed to have abandoned the men in Iron Bottom Sound. It was a strange, hesitant faith in a box of wires and vacuum tubes, a fragile belief in a flickering green line on a phosphorescent screen. It was the birth of radar, and for the sailors of the U.S. Navy, it was nothing short of a miracle. a magic eye that promised to tear the cloak of night from their enemies and give them the one thing they craved above all else, a fighting chance. For months, the American sailor had been a blind man in a knife fight. He had strained his eyes against a solid wall of blackness, his life depending on the faintest smudge of smoke against the stars or the ghostly white of a ship's wake. He was constantly outmatched by his Japanese counterpart, a man whose eyesight had been honed by relentless, fanatical training to be a weapon in itself. The night was the Imperial Navy's kingdom, and the Americans were merely trespassers, stumbling blindly toward their doom. But far away from the blood-soaked waters of the Pacific, in the sterile, quiet laboratories of places like MIT, scientists were perfecting a new form of perception, a way to see with electricity instead of light. They called it radio detection and ranging, or radar. The principle was as elegant as it was revolutionary. A transmitter would send a pulse of radio energy hurtling into the void at the speed of light. If it struck an object, a ship, an airplane, an island, a tiny fraction of that energy would echo back, captured by a sensitive receiver. The time it took for the echo to return revealed the distance. The direction the antenna was pointing revealed the bearing. It was the sense of a bat, given to a battleship. On the earliest sets, the information appeared as a sharp spike, or blip, on a linear screen called an A-scope. It was not a picture, but a cryptic signal, a ghost in the machine that had to be interpreted by a new kind of sailor, the radar operator. These men were the new high priests of naval warfare, locked away in small, dark, stuffy compartments known as Combat Information Centers, or CICs. They were the ship's new electronic soul. While the captain and the lookouts stood on the open bridge, assailed by the wind and the spray, the radar man sat in the warm, humming darkness, his world contained entirely by the glowing screen before him. He was the first to see the enemy. He was the first to know that death was approaching, long before any human eye could pierce the gloom. Imagine being that operator. You are 20 years old, a farm boy from Iowa who had never seen the ocean until a year ago. Now you are the nerve center of a billion-dollar warship. For hours, you have stared at the hypnotic sweep of the green line, the static on the screen a form of electronic snow. The air is thick with the smell of ozone and stale coffee. Then, you see it. A tiny, almost imperceptible spike at a range of 12 miles. It's not supposed to be there. You check your settings, your heart beginning to beat a little faster. You call it out to the talker, your voice tight. Radar contact, bearing 090, range 24000. A skeptical voice crackles back from the bridge. Are you sure, radar? We have nothing visually. The lookouts, the men with the powerful binoculars, the legends of the fleet, see nothing. For a terrifying minute, you are alone with your ghost. Is it a rain squall, a flock of birds, or is it the Tokyo Express? You hold your breath, keep your eyes glued to the scope, and report again. Contact is firming up. It's real, and it's closing. In that moment, the captain has to make a choice. Trust the seasoned eyes of his lookouts, or trust the farm boy in the dark room staring at a ghost on a screen. He chooses the ghost. Commence firing solution, he orders. For the first time, the ship is not reacting. It is hunting. The magic eye is open. This new technology was not a panacea. The early SG radar sets were primitive and temperamental. They showed phantom contacts and were bedeviled by clutter from waves and weather. Commanders who had spent their lives trusting their own intuition were slow to place their faith in the cryptic pronouncements of the black box. But in the brutal crucible of the Solomons, the lessons were learned quickly. A ship with radar, even a faulty one, had a chance. A ship without one was a lamb for the slaughter. Slowly, tentatively, the balance began to shift. The darkness was no longer an absolute monarch. There was now an eye that could pierce its veil, an eye that never blinked, never tired, and saw everything. The hunters were about to become the hunted. A sword, no matter how sharp, is but a cold piece of steel without a hand to guide its edge. A magic eye is useless without a mind to interpret its visions and a will to act upon them. The U.S. Navy had its new technology, the flickering, nascent promise of radar, but technology alone does not win wars. It needed a new kind of warrior, a leader whose spirit burned as brightly as the phosphorescent screens in his combat information centers. It needed a man who thought faster, moved faster, and fought harder than the enemy. It needed a force of nature. It needed Captain Arleigh Albert Burke. Burke was not cast from the traditional mold of a senior naval officer. He was not a stately, patient battleship admiral. He was a destroyer man, heart and soul, and he possessed the soul of his chosen ship, lean, fast, aggressive, and impatient. He was a jolt of pure, high-voltage electricity injected into a navy suffering from exhaustion and despair. He was a man who seemed to vibrate with a barely suppressed energy, a man who famously claimed he needed only a few hours of sleep and whose idea of relaxation was figuring out a faster way to kill the enemy. His eyes, set in a weathered face, missed nothing and forgave less, especially when it came to incompetence or hesitation. He earned his legendary nickname in the crucible of the South Pacific. While serving as Chief of Staff to Admiral Bull Halsey, Burke drove himself and his staff with a relentless ferocity that became mythic. After one particularly grueling period of non-stop operations, a concerned Halsey ordered Burke and his staff to take a rest. Burke's convoy was damaged and limping along at a slow 24 knots. When Halsey, miles away, received a report of a new Japanese threat, he radioed Burke, demanding to know how long it would take him to resume his duties. Burke, who had never actually stopped working, replied that he was proceeding to the rendezvous at 30 knots. It was a bold, almost insubordinate claim for a battered convoy. Halsey, recognizing a kindred spirit, simply messaged back, "If you can make 30 knots, why aren't you making 31? From that day forward, he was 31-knot Burke, a name that perfectly encapsulated his entire philosophy. Push the limits, then push them further. Speed was life, hesitation was death. Imagine you are a bosun's mate on a destroyer that has somehow survived the hell of Iron Bottom Sound. You've seen 3 sister ships go down. You've pulled oil-choked survivors from the water. You've learned to hate the night. The mood on your ship is a grim cocktail of fatalism and exhaustion. Then the scuttlebutt spreads like wildfire through the mess decks. A new Commodore is taking over the squadron. His name is Burke. 31-knot Burke. They say he never sleeps. They say he wants to fight at night. They say his first order was to strip the ships of anything that would slow them down. Paint, excess furniture, even the officers' fancy chinaware. At first, you're terrified. This man sounds like he's going to get you all killed. But then you hear his words, passed down from the bridge. He's told the captains they are not to wait for his orders. On contact with the enemy, they are to attack, immediately, with everything they have. A strange new feeling begins to displace the dread, a feeling of exhilaration. You are no longer a target, waiting to be hit. You are no longer bait. Under this man, you are going to be the hunter. For the first time in months, you look out at the setting sun, not with fear, but with a cold, predatory anticipation. When Arleigh Burke took command of Destroyer Squadron 23 in October of 1943, he did not just take over a group of ships. He began forging a weapon. He inherited a collection of brand new Fletcher-class destroyers, the finest the world had ever seen, all equipped with the latest SG radar. But they were just ships, and their crews were green. Burke drilled them with a merciless intensity. He ran them at night, in foul weather, pushing men and machines to their breaking points. He was crafting a single, cohesive fighting unit, a pack of wolves that could think and act as one. He issued his famous standing orders, a revolutionary document that empowered his captains. The squadron will attack on enemy contact, without awaiting orders from the task force commander. He was giving them permission to be as aggressive as he was. The man, the machine, and the moment had converged. A new predator was about to be unleashed on the Tokyo Express. A weapon is only as deadly as the doctrine that wields it. Arleigh Burke now had the ships, a full squadron of brand new, powerful Fletcher-class destroyers, designated Destroyer Squadron 23, USS Charles Osborne, USS Claxton, USS Dyson, USS Spence, USS Converse. To an untrained eye, they were just 5 identical greyhounds of the sea, smelling of fresh paint and new machinery. But in Burke's mind, they were raw potential, a set of perfectly tuned instruments waiting for a conductor to arrange them into a symphony of destruction. His task was to take these ships, manned by green crews who had never heard a shot fired in anger, and forge them on the anvil of his will into a single, seamless killing machine. The forging process was brutal and relentless. Burke was a demon of a taskmaster. He believed that the chaos of battle could only be mastered by practicing in conditions that were even more demanding. He ran his squadron ragged. High-speed maneuvers in pitch-black nights, with ships just a few hundred yards apart, became routine. He would simulate every conceivable disaster: engines failing, steering jammed, communications cut. He forced his captains and their CIC teams to fight blind, relying only on their radar scopes and the curt, coded messages that flashed between ships. They practiced until the complex dance of a torpedo attack became second nature, until the squadron could turn and fire as one, a single organism with 5 bodies. His tactical philosophy was a radical departure from the Navy's cautious playbook. The Combat Information Center, the ship's electronic brain, would not be a passive listening post. Under Burke, it became the heart of an offensive weapon. He and his staff on the flagship, the Charles Osborne, would become the central nervous system of the entire pack. They would process the radar data from all 5 ships, weaving it into a single clear picture of the battlefield. From this central hub, he would direct his wolves. His orders were famously brief and to the point. Attack on contact. Fire torpedoes. Turn away. There was no room for doubt or delay. He was training his captains to trust the radar, trust his commands, and above all, to trust each other's violent, instantaneous reactions. Imagine you're the executive officer on the USS Dyson, plowing through a tempestuous sea at 30 knots. It's 2 in the morning, the night so black you can't see the bow from the bridge. You are in close formation, so close that the churning wake of the ship ahead, the Claxton, feels like it's close enough to touch. Every instinct screams that you are on the verge of a catastrophic collision. The old rules are being broken. Then, a voice crackles from the speaker, the calm, clipped tone of the Commodore on the flagship. Stand by for simultaneous 90-degree turn to starboard. Your captain gives the order, and the helmsman spins the wheel. The ship leans hard, groaning as it carves a sharp turn in the black water. You brace for impact, for the sickening screech of metal on metal. But it never comes. When the ship steadies on its new course, you look at your own radar scope. The 5 brilliant green blips that are your squadron have moved in perfect, geometric unison, as if they were a single entity. In that moment, the terror drains away, replaced by a surge of awe and ferocious pride. You are not 5 separate ships blundering in the dark. You are a predator. You are a pack. And you suddenly feel very, very sorry for the first Japanese ship that wanders into your sights. It was during this intense period of training that the squadron earned its unlikely nickname. Inspired by a popular comic strip character, a plucky, industrious Native American beaver, The squadron artist created a logo. It depicted a red-skinned beaver armed with a torpedo and a six-shooter, looking ready for a fight. The name stuck. Destroyer Squadron 23 became the Little Beavers. It was a whimsical, almost gentle name for what they were becoming, the most lethal destroyer squadron in the world. The Beaver builds dams with relentless teamwork. Burke's Beavers were being trained to build a dam of steel and fire across the path of the Tokyo Express. By late 1943, the forging was complete. The crews were no longer green. They were sharp, confident, and hungry. The 5 ships were no longer just ships. They were a coordinated pack, their electronic senses linked, their crews thinking as one, all driven by the relentless, aggressive spirit of 31-knot Burke. The weapon was ready. It now needed a battle to blood itself. The dark waters of the Solomon Islands were waiting. The first day of November, 1943. On the black sand beaches of Cape Torokina, in a corner of Bougainville Island, known as Empress Augusta Bay, 34,000 United States Marines were storming ashore. It was the next bloody step on the brutal ladder of island hopping, a move designed to isolate the massive Japanese base at Rabaul. The landings were a success, but every man on that beachhead knew that the real test would come with the darkness. From Rabaul, the Empire would send its fist to smash them. The Tokyo Express was coming, more powerful than ever, on a mission not of supply, but of annihilation. The Japanese force, under the command of Admiral Sentaro Omori, was a formidable array of steel. The heavy cruisers, Miyoko and Haguro, the light cruisers Agano and Sendai, and 6 destroyers. These were veteran ships manned by veteran crews, the undisputed champions of nocturnal combat. They steamed south with supreme confidence, expecting to sweep aside any American interference, slaughter the vulnerable transports, and pound the Marine positions into dust. But waiting for them in the dark was an American task force of a new and different breed. Task Force 39, commanded by Rear Admiral Tip Merrill, comprised 4 light cruisers and 8 destroyers, split into 2 squadrons. One of those squadrons, held in the rear to guard the transports, was Arleigh Burke's Destroyer Squadron 23, the Little Beavers. They were about to witness the dawn of a new age. Just after 2:30 in the morning on November 2nd, the magic eye blinked. Radar operators on Merrill's cruisers picked up the first faint ghosts of Omori's force at a range of nearly 20 miles. The Japanese were blind. The Americans could see. Merrill, a cool and methodical commander, had his plan ready. He would not charge into a gunfight. He would use his destroyers to launch a stealthy torpedo attack from the flanks, sow chaos in the enemy's neat column, and then use his cruisers' radar-guided guns to pick them apart from a distance. It was a cold, electronic execution, planned in the humming darkness of the Combat Information Center. The first torpedoes sliced through the water, but the Japanese, with the honed instincts of seasoned predators, skillfully evaded them. But the attack had its intended effect. The Japanese line, forced into a sharp turn, began to lose cohesion. Then, the sky ripped open. From over 7 miles away, Merrill's cruisers, Montpelier, Cleveland, Columbia, and Denver, unleashed a torrent of 6-inch shells. Guided by the unerring eye of radar, the shells fell with terrifying accuracy on an enemy they could not see. The Japanese sailors were stunned. The night was being lit by the flash of their own ships exploding, hit by an invisible assailant. On the bridge of the USS Charles Osborne, Captain Arleigh Burke watched the distant fireworks with a burning, agonizing impatience. He and his little beavers were the guard dogs, leashed to the transports, while the main fight raged miles away. He could hear the battle unfold over the radio, the calm, clipped reports from the radar plotters, the thunderous roar of the cruiser's salvos, the triumphant calls of "Target is hit, target is burning." For a man like Burke, being on the sidelines was a special kind of hell. Yet, as he watched, a fierce, predatory grin spread across his face. It was working. All the theory, all the relentless training, all his faith in radar and aggression, it was all being vindicated in the flashes on the horizon. The Japanese were confused, panicked, firing at phantoms. The spell of the long lance had been broken. For the first time, an American force was not just fending off the Tokyo Express, they were systematically dismantling it. He could feel the tide of the entire war turning in that very moment. His frustration was eclipsed by a cold, thrilling certainty. His turn would come, and when it did, there would be no quarter. The battle descended into a confused melee. The Japanese light cruiser Sendai, caught in the merciless crossfire, was torn apart and sank. The heavy cruiser Miyoko, in a desperate evasive maneuver, sliced into the destroyer Hatsukaze, shearing its bow off and leaving it a crippled wreck. Admiral Omori, his force in disarray and pounded by an enemy he could neither see nor effectively engage, lost his nerve. Believing he was facing a much larger force of heavy cruisers, he made the fateful decision to turn back. He had failed. The transports were safe. The Battle of Empress Augusta Bay was a staggering American victory, a turning point written in fire and steel. It was the first time a major Japanese naval force had been decisively defeated in a night battle. The myth of Japanese invincibility in the darkness was shattered. For Arleigh Burke and his little beavers, it was the final, electrifying validation. They had tasted the promise of victory. Soon, they would deliver the killing blow themselves. The night of November 24, 1943, was thick with a humid, tropical stillness. For the Americans, it was the eve of Thanksgiving, a time for quiet reflection. But in the waters off the island of New Ireland, there was no peace. A Tokyo Express was running, but this time it was a mission of retreat. 5 Japanese destroyers, the powerful escorts Onami and Makinami, and the transport destroyers Amagiri, Yugiri, and Uzuki, were tasked with evacuating aviation personnel from the soon-to-be isolated base on Buka Island. They were a wounded wolf pack, their mission a tacit admission of defeat in the skies. But they were still wolves, dangerous, and commanded by the proud Captain Kyoto Kagawa, a master of night combat. On the flagship of Destroyer Squadron 23, Arleigh Burke was about to sit down to a Thanksgiving dinner when the message arrived. An American reconnaissance plane had spotted Kagawa's force. They were headed south. Burke didn't hesitate. Dinner was forgotten. This was the moment he had been training for, the moment he had been born for. This was not a defensive action or a complex fleet engagement. This was a pure, clean destroyer action, a pack of wolves against another. He famously signaled his superiors, "Stand aside. I'm going in." With his 5 little beavers, Charles Osborne, Claxton, Dyson, Converse, and Spence, he turned his bows north and pushed his engines to their limits, racing at 31 knots to intercept the enemy on their return journey. Burke's plan was a work of predatory genius, a trap woven from radio waves and tactical audacity. Using his superior speed, he would get ahead of the unsuspecting Japanese column. He would then split his forces. He would lead his own division, Osborne, Claxton, and Dyson, to strike the Japanese van with a devastating torpedo attack from their blind spot. The 2nd Division, under Captain Bernard Austin, would sweep in from the other side, cutting off any escape and finishing the cripples with gunfire. They were not meeting the enemy head-on. They were surrounding them in the dark, setting a perfect ambush where the only guide was the unwavering green line on a radar scope. At 1:40 in the morning on November 25th, the trap was sprung. In the CIC of the Osborne, a radar operator called out the contact. 5 bogeys, range 22,000 yards. They were precisely where Burke predicted they would be, steaming along in a neat column, utterly oblivious. On the bridge, Burke was a figure of ice-cold calm. He maneuvered his division into a perfect firing position, broadside to the enemy's path. The Japanese lookouts saw nothing. Their own radars, if they were even switched on, detected nothing. They were ghosts sailing toward a ghostly death. At 1:55, at a range of just over 3 miles, Burke gave the quiet, chilling order. Fire torpedoes. 15 tin fish, a full salvo from 3 ships, slid silently into the black water, their oxygen-fueled engines leaving no wake as they raced toward the unsuspecting column. You are in the CIC of the USS Charles Osborne. The air is electric, so quiet you can hear the hum of the gyro compass. On the plotting table, the 5 enemy blips move in a predictable line. And now, there are new marks, grease-penciled tracks showing the path of your own torpedoes. The 2 sets of lines are converging. You hold your breath. The talker relays Burke's calm voice from the bridge. We have fired torpedoes. We are retiring to the north. But your eyes are glued to the screen. For 4 agonizing minutes, nothing happens. It is the longest 4 minutes of your life. Then, on the radar scope, something impossible occurs. The lead enemy blip, the destroyer Onami, simply vanishes. It does not burn. It does not slow down. One moment, it is a solid green echo of light. The next, there is only the gray snow of the empty sea. Seconds later, the second blip, the Makinami, flares with a sudden, brilliant intensity, a direct hit, and then it too fades into nothingness. There are no cheers. There is only a stunned, reverent silence. You have just witnessed a perfect assassination, a godlike act of electronic warfare where 2 enemy warships and over 400 men have been erased from existence without ever seeing their killer. The ambush was a staggering success. The 2 escorting destroyers, the deadliest threats, were gone, ripped apart by multiple torpedo hits before they could fire a single shot or send a single warning. The remaining 3 transport destroyers, seeing their escorts erupt into pillars of white fire, broke formation and scattered in panic. Now the second phase of the hunt began. Burke's wolves fell upon the fleeing sheep. They chased down the Yugiri, cornering it against the darkness. The 5-inch guns of the American destroyers, guided with unerring precision by radar, opened up. Shells walked across the water and slammed into the Yugiri, tearing it to shreds. It fought back bravely, but it was hopeless. It was a blind man fighting a ghost with a searchlight. Soon, it too was a burning wreck, slipping beneath the waves. The remaining 2 Japanese destroyers, Amagiri and Uzuki, escaped into a rain squall, their captains thanking the weather and their gods for their survival. But the verdict of the night was absolute. Arleigh Burke and his little beavers had sunk 3 Japanese destroyers and taken the lives of hundreds of seasoned sailors. Their own price for this stunning victory? 0. Not a single American ship was hit. Not a single American sailor was wounded. It was not a battle. It was an execution. It was the perfect, flawless victory that would be studied in naval academies for 100 years. It was the death knell of the Tokyo Express and the ultimate triumph of the Magic Eye. War is a matter of steel and explosives, but it is won and lost in the minds of men. The Battle of Cape St. George was more than a tactical masterpiece. It was a psychological cataclysm. It was the moment a virus of fear was injected directly into the heart of the Imperial Japanese Navy, spreading through its ranks with a chilling speed that no radio message could match. The news of the disaster, carried back by the 2 battered survivors who had fled into the night, was not just a report of loss. It was a new and terrifying gospel. The night was no longer theirs. For 2 years, the Japanese sailor had sailed into the darkness with the swagger of an undefeated champion. The night was his ally, a familiar cloak that hid his movements and amplified his strengths. His eyes were sharper, his torpedoes longer ranged, his spirit more attuned to the deadly ballet of nocturnal combat. The Americans were clumsy, loud, and blind, cattle to be slaughtered. This belief was the bedrock of his morale, a conviction as solid as the armor plate of the battleship Yamato. Cape St. George shattered that bedrock into dust. Now, when a Japanese destroyer captain peered from his bridge into the familiar blackness of the slot, he no longer saw a hunting ground. He saw an ambush waiting to be sprung. Every shadow, every patch of empty sea was pregnant with menace. The very darkness that had once been his sanctuary now felt like a cage. His peerless night vision was worthless against an enemy who could see for 20 miles with an eye that needed no light. His magnificent long-lance torpedo was a useless spear if he could be killed long before he was even in range to throw it. The psychological reversal was absolute and devastating. The hunter now had the constant, gnawing feeling of being watched, of being stalked. Imagine you are a Japanese lookout, perched high on the mast of the destroyer Shigure. You are a veteran of a dozen night actions. You have seen the flash of your own torpedoes hitting home, watched American cruisers burn, and felt the thrill of victory. You once owned this darkness. But tonight is different. As you scan the horizon, you are not looking for targets. You are looking for your own death. You are listening not for the sound of enemy engines, but for the silence that precedes a radar-guided torpedo strike. Every time your ship changes course, a cold knot of dread forms in your stomach. Is the captain dodging a torpedo he hasn't told you about? Your eyes strain, but you know it's pointless. The enemy isn't a ship you can see. It is a ghost. It is a blip on a screen miles away. The arrogance you once felt has curdled into a cold, sickening fear. You are no longer a samurai of the sea. You are prey, waiting for the talons of an invisible hawk. This deep-seated fear had immediate strategic consequences. The Tokyo Express, once the relentless lifeline and hammer of the Solomon Islands campaign, began to falter. The runs became less frequent, more cautious, often aborted at the first hint of danger. The cost of losing irreplaceable destroyers and their veteran crews to these flawless American ambushes was becoming unsustainable. The Japanese combined fleet, which had once thrown its ships into the fray with reckless abandon, now began to husband its precious resources, pulling its best destroyer squadrons back to protect the main battle fleet. The Kingdom of Darkness had been usurped. The American Little Beavers, and other destroyer squadrons like them, now roamed the waters of the South Pacific with the swaggering confidence that had once belonged to their enemy. They were the new masters of the night. The fear they had once felt had been transferred, like a contagion, to their foes. The hunters had, in the most complete and terrifying way imaginable, become the hunted. A legend is not born from a single victory, no matter how flawless. It grows in the telling and retelling, in the quiet awe of its witnesses, and in the chilling fear of its victims. After Cape St. George, the story of Arleigh Burke and his Little Beavers spread like a fast-moving current through the entire Pacific Fleet. It was more than a battle report. It was a blueprint for victory, a New Testament for the Church of Naval Warfare. The whimsical nickname of the Little Beavers would forever belong to Destroyer Squadron 23, a badge of honor for the squadron that landed the perfect blow. But the reputation they carved out of the night, the predatory spirit they unleashed, was inherited by every American destroyer that followed in their wake. A new, more primal name began to be whispered for these ships. They were the Wild Cats of the fleet. The name was a perfect fit for their new hunting style. Like a panther, a U.S. destroyer now prowled the blackness with a silent, arrogant confidence. Its radar was its supernatural sense of smell and hearing, detecting its prey from miles away, long before the prey knew it was being stalked. Its combat information center was its cold, calculating feline brain, plotting the perfect angle of attack. And when the moment came, it pounced with an explosive, coordinated fury, the silent claws of its torpedoes striking first, followed by the deafening roar of its 5-inch guns, tearing the crippled target to pieces. This was no longer a navy fighting on the defensive. Inspired by Burke's success and armed with ever-improving radar technology, destroyer squadrons across the Pacific went on the offensive. They became the all-purpose predators of the ocean. They formed protective screens around the fast carrier task forces, their radar nets a picket line of electronic eyes that no Japanese snooper could penetrate. They hunted Japanese submarines with a relentless proficiency, turning the hunters of the deep into the hunted. They escorted convoys, bombarded shore positions, and, most importantly, they owned the night. The very waters that had once been the graveyard of American hopes, Iron Bottom Sound, were now an American lake, a place where Japanese ships dared not tread after sundown. Imagine you are a gun captain on the USS Fletcher, the lead ship of her illustrious class. It is late 1944. You are on radar picket duty off the coast of the Philippines, a dagger pointed at the heart of the Japanese Empire. The night is absolute, but inside the steel hull of your ship, there is no fear. There is only a quiet, humming readiness. You and your crew are asleep at your stations, but you are not tired. You are coiled, like a spring. The voice of the talker from the CIC is a constant, calming presence in your headphones. You listen to the dispassionate reports of contacts, friendly ships, distant landmasses, but you are waiting for one specific call. The call that says, unidentified contact, closing. You feel no dread. You feel a surge of adrenaline, a hunter's thrill. You know that your ship's electronic eyes have already found the enemy, that its brain is already solving the firing problem. All you have to do is wait for the order and then unleash a perfectly aimed storm of steel. You are no longer hoping to survive the night. You are hoping the enemy is foolish enough to show up. The psychological dominance was total. Japanese naval documents captured after the war revealed the depth of this new fear. Captains spoke of demon destroyers that seemed to appear from nowhere, that could not be seen or hit, and that struck with a terrifying scientific precision. The legend of the American Wildcats became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Believing themselves to be outmatched, Japanese commanders became hesitant and defensive, and that hesitation was fatal. From the Solomon Islands to the Philippines, from the coast of New Guinea to the shores of Okinawa, the American destroyers wrote the final chapters of the naval war in the Pacific. They had been forged in the fires of defeat, humiliated in the dark waters off Guadalcanal, but they had learned, adapted, and overcome. Armed with the magic eye of radar and driven by a new spirit of relentless aggression, they had seized the night. The ghosts of Iron Bottom Sound had been avenged, and a new legend, the legend of the Wildcats of the Night Ocean, was etched forever into the history of the sea. The war in the Pacific, like all wars, eventually ended. The thunder of great naval guns faded into a profound silence, replaced by the whisper of wind over the vast, empty ocean. The waves that now gently lap the shores of Savo Island carry no memory of the fire that once danced upon their surface, and the jungle has long since reclaimed the foxholes and gun pits of Guadalcanal. But beneath the placid blue waters of Iron Bottom Sound, the lessons remain, resting in the eternal quiet of the deep, written not in ink, but in the corroded iron of sunken warships. The story of the American destroyer in the Pacific is a parable written in fire and salt water, a timeless lesson on the nature of victory. It was not a victory won by a single miracle weapon. The magic eye of radar, in its infancy, was a flawed and temperamental oracle, its pronouncements often cryptic and misleading. The long lance torpedo remained, until the very end, a mechanically superior piece of engineering. The triumph was not one of machine over machine. It was a triumph of a system, a perfect, brutal synthesis of technology, doctrine, and human spirit. The first lesson, therefore, was that technology is only potential. It was the doctrine, the tactical philosophy pioneered by men like Arleigh Burke that unlocked radar's true power. His creed of speed, aggression, and trust in the Combat Information Center transformed the destroyer from a defensive screen into a predator. He crafted a symphony of destruction conducted from a darkened room, a new way of fighting that valued electronic data over human eyesight and rewarded immediate, violent action. He taught his wolf packs not just how to fight, but how to think as a single, electronically linked predator. But even the finest doctrine and the most advanced technology are cold and useless without the final, most crucial element, the human heart. The war was ultimately won by the anonymous young men from the farms and cities of America who sat for endless hours in humming, lightless compartments, learning to interpret the ghost light of a radar screen. It was won by the captains who learned to trust the spectral dance of electrons more than the evidence of their own senses, and who had the courage to plunge their ships at 31 knots into a blackness that they knew held certain death. And it was won by the gun crews and torpedo men who learned to serve their weapons with a cold, terrifying efficiency, guided by voices from a speaker relaying coordinates from an invisible eye. This was the birth of modern warfare. Every drone pilot guiding his vehicle from a continent away, every cyber warrior fighting in a digital battle space, every soldier navigating by the light of a satellite signal, all are the direct descendants of those first radar operators in the Solomons. The battle for the night was the moment warfare transcended the limits of human perception and became a contest of systems, of data, and of the men who could master them. The Japanese Imperial Navy, with its proud warrior traditions and its peerless night optics, was the first, most powerful victim of this new age. In the end, the sea keeps its secrets. The names of the great ships, Onami, Quincy, Atlanta, Ugiri, are now just echoes in history books. But the lesson they paid for in blood endures. Victory belongs not always to the strongest, nor to the bravest, nor to the most technologically advanced. It belongs to those who can learn, who can adapt, and who can forge all three into a single, sharp, and merciless sword. Thank you for watching to the end. If you liked it, please give it a like, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell so you don't miss new videos. There are more amazing stories to come. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.